The Syntax of Things by Arisha. Chapter 70. Parentheses. Everything Harry didn't know. Time, Harry thought, was like walking backwards away from something. Say, from a kiss. First there was the kiss, then the stepping back, and the eyes filling up his vision, then the eyes framed in the face as he stepped further away. The face then would be part of a body, and the body would be framed in a doorway. The doorway would then be framed in the trees beside it, too. The path would grow longer, and the door smaller, the trees filling up his sight, and the door would be lost. Then the path would be lost in the woods, too, and the woods would be lost in the hills. And somewhere in the center there would still be the kiss. This time I shall enter the frame myself, Harry Potter, and I shall find you, and I shall punish every last man, woman, and child who has tried to conceal you from me. 1 hour. The voice spoke directly in Harry's head. Harry couldn't care less. Another voice said something else, and he was struck with the impression that he knew that voice well. And then Ron's face was in front of him and was blocking the face he really wanted to see. "Get lost, Ron!" he screamed. "Go, go!" "Harry!" Hermione started. "Leave, both of you," he croaked. "I want to be alone." It was only when the shack's door closed behind him that Harry pushed at the chest of the lifeless body before him with all his might. The sobs he had been holding back all evening burst out of him, desperately drowning his lungs in a kind of grief he had never thought possible. "No, no," he repeated again and again, the useless tears running down his face and making his vision foggy. He passed his hand through Snape's bloodied hair, looking at his pale face. "No." He was unable to speak, unable to breathe, but he kept pushing at Snape's chest, begging to sense a heartbeat, praying to hear a gasp. Nothing happened. Harry wanted to lie down, to hug him and tell him that he was sorry. He didn't know what for. He didn't know anything. The loneliness sucked him up and choked him. He couldn't leave him here. Snape wouldn't have left him. But this wasn't true, because Snape had betrayed him and killed Dumbledore and worshipped Voldemort until the end. He would turn Harry to Voldemort. He would be proud of having done so. "Stop it," he cried out, choking with every word. "Stop it. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Stop. Stop." He cried like his heart had been shredded to pieces. "You promised," he yelled. "Please." And before he knew it, there were hands touching him from behind, tearing him away from Snape's body, and Hermione's voice was saying something, but he thrashed away, and he closed his eyes as he tried to will the image of a dead Severus Snape away. "You promised, Severus, you promised!" He kept crying. No one answered. If someone asked him, Harry wouldn't have been able to recall how he found himself at the Great Hall, nor how he managed to get himself out of the shrieking shack and stop his tongue from spilling everything out to his friends right then and there. He stared at the bodies of Remus and Tonks with apathy, and he watched as Molly Weasley held their dead son in her arms. All these deaths had happened because of him, and there was nothing he could do to change it. The numbness at the back of his mind denied it all. Like a tiny voice, it seemed to be, that was trying to convince him that none of this was real. He almost expected the corpses to start breathing again, to see them rise and clap and announce that everything had been an act, a sick joke. Everyone was unnaturally silent. The dead lay in a row, and the living didn't dare to grieve them. Grieving would mean acceptance. Remus was dead. Tonks was dead. Fred was dead too. And Severus? Severus? Harry ran to the marble staircase, wishing to escape everything, hoping to never have to stop running until he'd gone so far that none of this would hold any importance to him anymore. The corridors were empty, but the torches were lit. Not a single ghost was in sight as Harry stopped before the gargoyle guarding the headmaster's office. "Password?" the gargoyle asked. "Dumbledore," said Harry in despair, and he didn't have the strength to feel thankful when the statue stepped aside and revealed the familiar staircase. The portraits hanging on the walls were empty, the windows weren't shattered, and the floor was clean, smooth, and polished. Everything seemed to have remained untouched from the battle that had half the castle collapse. The Pensieve was waiting for him on the desk, not a single trace of dust was covering it. Harry leaned over it, and with a shaking hand, he poured inside the memories Severus had given him. The first and last gift he would ever receive from him. He had to know. Whatever it was that Severus had left behind for Harry to see, no matter what it was Severus's, and much to Harry's self-hatred, that still meant something. The memory swirled, and Harry dived. He landed on a muddy yard, surrounded by soggy tall grass and litter. Behind him stood an abandoned building in a state of grave disrepair, strewn with trash and scrawled with graffiti. Kneeling on the mud was a man with unkempt short gray hair dressed in industrial workwear. Harry recognized him almost immediately for Snape's father. Instead of angry or drunk, however, the man in the memory was simply smiling and extending his hands in excitement.
"Come on, Sev. You're going for a hat trick. 2 out of 3. Don't give up now."
Across from him, no more than 10 feet away, stood a small dark-haired boy who was cradling a football in both hands.
"But what if I hurt my knee again?" the boy complained. 2 out of 3, Sev. Don't overthink it. Come on. You can do this.
The man clapped his hands in encouragement, and the boy placed the ball in front of him. He took a deep breath and kicked it. Tobias could have easily blocked the ball, but he slowed his reaction purposely, letting the boy score. The boy's jaw dropped in excitement. Tobias whistled with his fingers loudly and ran to his son, picking him up in a loving embrace.
"And he wins! Ladies and gentlemen, this is the best execution Cookworth has seen this year. Is Severus Snape going for the World Cup?"
The boy giggled uncontrollably, his small hands wrapped around his father's neck as Tobias kissed his forehead. The memory faded in darkness, and now Harry was standing at the top of the stairs in Severus's home. Severus was there too, sitting on the steps, still impossibly young and pale. He was hugging his knees and worrying his lip as he listened to the conversation taking place downstairs.
"To conceal this from me, like I meant absolutely nothing to you."
"Toby, I couldn't. The statute of secrecy—"
"So you preferred to carry on living a double life for how long exactly? For how long were you planning to hide this from me?"
"Has it crossed your mind that I simply didn't want to put you in danger?"
"Has it crossed your mind that I deserve the truth?" the man yelled. "Why now then, Ellie? What the hell in all this? Did I not have the right to choose for myself if I want to be with someone who has bloody superpowers?"
"Severus has started showing signs."
A deep silence followed, and for a moment Harry thought he could hear Severus holding his breath, just as loudly as he could hear his own rapidly beating heart. Then Tobias spoke, and his voice was but a murmur.
"What?"
"He's showing signs, Toby. He's like me,"
the woman said.
"What did you say?"
"I had to—"
"My son. My own son is like this."
"He's a wizard, yes. He was always meant to be."
Harry was startled at the abrupt sound of a slap. The young boy sitting on the steps covered his ears and shut his eyes. The scene changed. Harry found himself in a pub and was immediately welcomed by the horrific scent of smoke and sweat. Tobias was chatting with 3 other men at the bar, laughing loudly and repeatedly banging his glass of beer on the table to attract the bartender's attention. Harry looked around for Severus and found him sitting alone at the far end of the bar, lazily playing with a plastic straw as he yawned and rubbed his eyes. The heavy outdoor opened and a small woman walked in, soaked in the rain and visibly out of breath. She squeezed herself through the crowd of men hurriedly, reaching the young boy and picking him up in her arms.
"Oh, here you are, thank God,"
she told him. Her relief lasted a second. Then she was angry. She jabbed Tobias hard on the shoulder one time and then a second one. Tobias turned and eyed her indifferently.
"I looked everywhere," she said. "All evening I've been searching everywhere. I nearly lost my mind. And to think they should bring him here. This is no place for kids. You didn't even leave a note. I thought you'd left. I thought something must have happened."
"Fuck off,"
Tobias said coldly.
"Take him with you."
Harry was pulled from the pub violently. Around him constructed the room Harry had stayed in when he had spent his first summer with Severus. It looked completely different now. Numerous toys and colorful puzzles were scattered on the floor, while on the bed the same woman was cuddling her son from behind, wiping his tears with a trembling hand. A purple bruise was covering the boy's cheek and lips.
"He didn't mean it," the woman whispered. "He's having a hard time understanding this. Understanding us. It'll be fine, you'll see. He just needs some time, baby, okay? Everything will be the way it was."
In the next memory, young Severus was holding his football again. He approached his father, who was sitting on the couch reading a newspaper. "Want to play?"
Not now.
The boy stared. You said we'd go out today.
Go with your mother.
She's not feeling well.
Surprise, surprise.
You said we'd go out today, Severus repeated.
Not now, Severus. But you... Because I see I'm busy. For fuck's sake, just go away.
The living room gave place to an abandoned playground with a couple of broken swings and a metal slide. A small red-haired girl was sitting on the yellow grass, her back resting against the chain-link fence as she read her book. On the other side of the fence, Severus had stopped short to inspect a rusty old car that lacked doors and wheels. He seemed a couple of years older now. When he noticed the girl, his expression changed. He stepped on a twig and the girl jumped up at the sound.
Who's there?
Severus squared his shoulders, and after a moment of hesitation, he revealed himself. I'm sorry, I saw you were there and just wanted to say hi.
You're the boy from yesterday. You were watching Toonie and me, and now you're doing it again.
No, said Severus, slightly panicked. I wasn't watching her, I was only watching you. The girl's eyebrows rose before she burst into laughter.
You're weird. What do you want?
You're Lily.
She smiled. And you're a Snape. Mommy says I shouldn't be talking to boys. She doesn't know.
I'm Severus, the boy said simply, rounding the fence to meet her.
I told her what you said about me. That I'm a witch. She laughed.
But you are. Lily shrugged her shoulders. Hesitantly, Severus lowered himself to the ground and sat cross-legged across her. Lily gave him the book she was holding.
You know the story of the princess and the frog? She kisses the frog and he becomes a prince.
Really? Severus opened the book curiously. That means the prince is an animagus. It's very difficult to become one. It needs lots and lots of magic. I'm sure you could do it, though. Your magic seems strong.
Lily laughed loudly. You're so silly, she said. Witches don't exist. What makes you think I'm a witch?
Severus lowered his eyes, his cheeks turning bright red as he suppressed a smile. The scene dissolved and reformed. Lily was sitting on a bed covered in pink sheets, braiding Severus's hair with deep concentration.
There,
she said proudly. Severus looked at the mirror in his hand with abandonment. His hair was interlaced into two neat braids secured in place with two fluffy ribbons. I look like a girl.
You look like a proper gentleman, I think.
Severus didn't seem to like it, but the struggle was visible on his face to not disappoint her. My dad says long hair is for girls.
Your dad's wrong. Your hair looks amazing. Don't cut it ever.
Wizards have long hair sometimes. Mom says so.
Do you know many wizards?
Not really, no. We used to. I mean, my mom had a few wizard friends in the past. But my dad, it's been a long time since we had people over.
How's he doing with the new job?
Severus glanced at the window, then made a face. They fired him. Again.
I'm so sorry, Sev. Then, with a smile on her face, tell me about how words express again.
Severus's face lit up immediately as he started narrating all the magical details. Now it was night time, and Severus was in his bed, pressing his hands flat against his ears. His attempts to block out the fight that was going on in the other room were futile. A loud bang was heard, and the floor vibrated from the intensity of it. A woman screamed and sobbed, and then came another loud bang. All of a sudden, Severus tossed his blanket aside and bolted up. Harry followed him to the corridor, where Severus attempted to open the other bedroom's door, only to find it locked. The woman sobbed again. Severus shook the door handle furiously. "Dad!" he yelled. "Dad, stop! Mom! Dad!" The door was slammed open, and Severus stepped back. Tobias looked down at the boy, whose eyes were now glimmering. "Go to your bed," Tobias said. Severus attempted to enter the room, but his father pushed him back. "Mom! Go to your bed!" the man repeated. "You hurt Mom!"
"Sev, do what your father says now!"
the woman called, her voice rough and unsteady. Harry could not see her from where he stood. Severus sprinted under Tobias's arm, ignoring his threats, and reaching his mother, who was sitting on the floor next to an impossibly big pile of British pounds. She did not look at him. Her eyes were red, and her lowering lip was trembling. Another explosive sound was heard, and half of the pile vanished into thin air. "Again!" Tobias said. "And this time make it last!" Pulling Severus by his shirt, he tossed him outside the bedroom and locked the door. Then Harry was in a snowy garden. Petunia, Lily, and Severus were having a snowball fight. Lily and Petunia giggled. Petunia hit Severus with a snowball, but Severus retaliated with a rock that hit her shoulder. Lily screamed as she ran by Petunia's side, who cried louder than necessary. "What the heck, Sam? What's wrong with you?" Lily shouted.
I didn't...
Didn't what? Didn't what? Why would you do that? For Christ's sake!
Lily and Petunia left, joining a group of kids who were building a snowman at the other side of the street. Severus stayed there, standing alone, snowball in hand. Once more the scene changed. Severus watched as Lily and Petunia argued near the spiral staircase at King's Cross Station.
Freak!
Petunia shrieked at Lily, and then they were off to their way to Hogwarts, squeezed in a tiny compartment in which Severus met Harry's dad and Sirius for the first time.
If you'd rather be brawny than brainy. Where you open to go seeing as you're neither, interrupted Sirius. James laughed. Lily stood up, looked at both James and Sirius with despise.
Come on, Severus, let's find another compartment. James tried to trip Severus as he passed. Sirius left a shoe mark on his robe.
"See you, Snivellus,"
a voice called as Lily and Severus walked away. They found an empty compartment and sat there.
"Cross your fingers for Slytherin,"
Severus said as soon as they closed the door. Why, which one's Slytherin again?
"Only the best Hogwarts house," he said. "You're a Muggle-born, so the hat might want to put you elsewhere. You never know, though. Just cross your fingers for the best one."
Okay. Lily smiled and raised her hand to show her crossed fingers. Severus smiled too. In the next memory, though, Lily was sorted into Gryffindor, and then everything dissolved once more.
"They're my dad's,"
Severus said. Lily took the pack of cigarettes from his hand and inspected it curiously. They seemed to be back in Cokeworth, and the summer breeze hit them graciously. Lily had a Gryffindor scarf wrapped around her waist, loosely tied in a knot. They were sitting on the grass next to a dirty, shallow river. "You've tried them?" Lily asked.
"No, not yet."
"I've never smoked before."
"Me neither," he said.
"We won't pick it up, though," she said seriously. "They say it's really difficult to quit once you start."
Severus nodded. "Yeah, I know. Dad always tries to quit and it just upsets him."
Lily put one in her mouth and Severus fished a lighter out of his pocket. He lit her cigarette and she inhaled.
All was well for a moment. Then she broke into a series of coughs, her face scrunched up in disgust. "Ew!" she said when the coughing had at long last subsided.
Severus took the cigarette from her hand and tried it too.
He seemed to handle it better than her.
"Come over on Saturday," Lily told him. "Mum's gonna cook that chicken you like."
Severus shook his head. "I've got studying to do."
She juggled. "It's like July."
"Which means I barely have a month left before we go back."
"Or that you're pushing yourself too hard again."
"Or that, unlike you, I have high expectations of myself. You know what I mean, if you were in Slytherin."
Lily glared. "You're so rude sometimes," she said dryly. Harry was pulled back to Hogwarts. This time, Severus seemed to be in his second or maybe third year of school. The first signs of puberty were beginning to show on his face, which was now slightly longer and covered in sparse-red spats. He was in the Slytherin common room. His wand pointed at two other boys who had their wands out as well.
"You have no respect for Slytherin, Snape."
"Is she worth the disgrace you bring to your house?"
the second boy added. "Is she at least any good?"
"Sick!" Severus's voice trailed off before he could finish the curse, as though he had changed his mind. He seemed insecure, hesitating. One of the boys turned to the other and laughed.
"I told you! He's trying to come up with his own spells. Who do you think you are, Snape? Are you Merlin himself, perhaps? Care to cook us some spells here, please?"
"Is that how you're keeping that mudblood around under your spells?" "Lily's just a friend from back home. I'm only kind to her because I've known her all my life. We're not together," said Severus.
"Lies! Brr!" the other boy argued. "Not even a mudblood would be interested in your face, Snape."
Trying to avoid their disarming spells, Severus retreated to the common room's exit. A spell hit him on the chest, and he was thrown backwards, landing outside the door. The boys pushed it closed, and Severus was locked outside. Muttering under his breath, he walked away, his shoulders hunched. Harry followed him to the yard. There he saw his dad jumping up to his feet and passing a hand through his hair as soon as he noticed that Severus was there too. Severus hadn't seen him yet.
"Please don't," thought Harry. "Please just ignore him."
"Snape!" James called. Severus didn't turn around until James' hand was on his shoulder. Severus jerked away as though he'd been electrified.
His own hand was close to his pocket, ready to draw his wand. "What do you want, Potter?" "Just wanted to thank you." He paused. He passed his hand through his hair again, this time making a face to himself, as though annoyed that his hair wouldn't stay in place. "Thank me," Severus repeated. "Yeah, Evans told me how you think I fancy her. Funny how she never noticed before thanks to you, now she does." The mean smile of satisfaction on his dad's face made Harry think that the resemblance everyone saw between them could not possibly exist. Then Severus and Lily were alone in an empty classroom, and Lily was rolling up Severus's sleeve. His arm was covered by angry red cuts. "You have to stop this. People will notice." "They won't. I know how to hide them." "You're hurting yourself, Sev. There was no excuse for that." "I'm not hurting myself. I'm just trying to perfect my spell." "You mean your curse," Lily corrected. "Sectum Sempra." Severus looked around cautiously, lowering his voice. "Sectum Sempra could be extremely useful as a defensive spell, too. At the moment, it can only cause superficial cuts, but if I perfect it, they won't look down on me again. No one would care." "You use it on yourself when you're upset. I know you. I know what you're doing. You're taking it out on yourself." Severus hesitated. "So what if I do? Who cares if I have a few scars anyway? It's not a big deal." "I care. I thought you knew that." "Oh, I know that," Severus spat. "It really felt like it last night when you were blabbing and giggling with Potter." "That has nothing to do with—" "Perhaps I should test my spell on him then. No, I could just slash his throat next time he tries to attack and ridicule me. What do you think, Lily?" His voice was drenched in poison, and Lily looked appalled. "And perhaps you should cover these scars with a dark mark then, it'd suit you great," she spat. Now Severus and Tobias were sitting next to each other on a hideous purple sofa in a small room that was dimly lit with red lights. Severus's arms were crossed over his chest, his face completely hidden by his long hair. He was bouncing his legs silently, looking entirely out of place. "Don't embarrass me," Tobias muttered. "I mean it. And don't say any stupid small talk, especially about all that magic business." "I don't want to do this." "That is exactly why we're here," Tobias hissed. "Because you don't want, and because you haven't. I won't let you end up a sissy, understood? You become a man tonight." "I am a man," Severus muttered. "No, you're not. A disappointment is what you are. A bloody magician." From behind a red curtain, a woman appeared wearing nothing but mismatched lingerie and a long, sparkling necklace. She seemed to be in her late 40s. Her long brown hair was covering her breasts. Severus turned his head the other way, pressing his lips together hard. He looked like he might cry. "Go," his father said, pushing him up to his feet. "Is shy," he said to the woman, who took Severus's unwilling hand and led him to a room. Harry knew the Mech's memory too well. He watched as Severus was bullied by his dad and Sirius, undressed and humiliated in front of their classmates. The word mudblood that spurted out of Severus's mouth along with his shame, and Harry grit his teeth. He knew what that meant. He knew that it had already happened and couldn't be changed. He knew Severus's fate after that day, and he didn't think there to be anything good for him to see from now on. Then Severus and Lily were outside the Gryffindor common room. Severus apologized again and again, but it was in vain. "I can't pretend any more. You've chosen your way, I've chosen mine," Lily said. Their memory changed again, and they were back in Spinner's End. Tobias was now pulling on his wife's hair violently as she sobbed. "I said no gibberish around the house, for fuck's sake! Do you get it now, or do you want me to repeat it till I get sick of you and your fucking stupidity?" He shoved her away, and she steadied herself against the wall. Her lips were torn. Her hand trembled as she brought it up to wipe the blood. Severus was watching from the other side of the room. Not a single emotion could be seen on his face. He seemed calm, as though he was observing an empty room. He couldn't be older than 16. "You're driving her crazy," Severus said coolly. "Let her use her magic or she'll snap." "Magic! Magic! Can your magic bring any cash, honey?" Reaching into his trousers pocket, Tobias fished out a crumpled 5-pound banknote and held it before her eyes. "Can you double this or something? Pay any bills with your hocus-pocus or what?" He threw the banknote on the floor and grabbed his wife's chin. She refused to look up. "Can your son, eh? Or is all this magic up just for show, when you can't even make a quid appear? Huh? Charlatans." Tobias left the room, and Severus approached his mother. "You won't leave him." It wasn't a question.
She shook her head.
Then you've chosen your fate.
Severus said, and his voice was dipped in disgust. The scene gave place to another, and Harry's blood froze. Severus was leaning against a wall in a lavish drawing room, furnished with golden chairs and green sofas. Tom Riddle, young, handsome, and human, was refilling Severus's glass with whiskey.
He's vicious, Severus said, obviously upset. Violent, abusive, selfish. He hits her, he cheats on her, he can never keep a job. Typical muggle, in other words, Tom said. I've met better ones. No, you haven't. They just know how to pretend. How to hide their true colors. They're animals, my friend. Severus shook his head. I don't know. I've met better ones. So much potential in you. Nearly lost because of this upbringing. Tell me, Severus, have you wondered where you would be now? Had you been raised in a proper environment, by someone who respected magic, who respected you? How much more you'd have learned, achieved. And Eileen, what a pity, such a proficient witch to end up in the hands of a filthy drunkard. You must surely see it for yourself, too, that you both deserved better. Severus stared intensely, his head lifted. I don't see how things could have been different. But your mother, no, it's too late for that. You see, she made her choice a long time ago, a terrible choice, obviously. Tom sighed. My ultimate goal, Severus, is to help people like her. People who may be heading down the same path. People who still have the chance to do better. People like us who should never have to be exposed. People like your muggle father. Now Tom had Severus's full attention. Now, come to our meeting tomorrow. You'll see for yourself how many wizards and witches share your concerns for the future. And believe me when I say to make this world a better place, we need the support of young men like you. Intelligent, determined, young men who understand that our ways should never mix with the muggle ones. Thank you, sir, Severus said. Thank you. And the memory changed. Harry was in Hogwarts in a deserted corridor. On the carpeted floor, Severus was frantically struggling to undo a hex that seemed to have glued his knees to the ground. Harry's father was there too, along with Sirius, who was wearing the invisibility cloak around his neck like a cape. It had to be their last year. Harry's dad looked different from the other memories. His jawline was strong and refined, and he was much taller too. Sirius had a proper stubble, and his hair was tied in a low ponytail. Severus's backpack lay on their feet, unzipped with the books spilled on the floor. Sirius was flipping through one of them, while James absently pointed his wand at Severus as he searched through the backpack for nothing in particular. Yo, check this out! Sirius said, lifting up the book he was holding. Didn't know you were royalty, Sniffy. You could have said something. This book belongs. Wait for it. He paused, making sure he had James's complete attention. To the half-blood prince! James burst into laughter so unexpectedly he nearly wheezed. The sound covered almost entirely Severus's threats and swears. I'm sorry, are you addressing us, your lordship? James asked. Yes, your highness, Sirius added eagerly, cocking his head sideways to observe the look on Severus's face. Severus ignored them, too focused on undoing the spell that had him stuck on the floor. Sirius kicked his wand out of his hand. I asked you something, Snivellus. Eat shit, Black. Uh-oh, James said breezily. That's really rude, Snivellus. Princes like yourself should have much better manners, no? Now, why don't you apologize? Severus seized his wand and jumped to his feet fast, so fast the movement stunned both James and Sirius into staggering back. Impedimenta! Fununculus! Petrificus top! Flipendo! Locomotor Wibbly! Sirius tossed the prince's book aside as all three of them continued throwing hexes, dodging and blocking the incoming ones hastily. Haven't you got anything better to do? Severus asked as the three boys circled around each other. And you, Black, what a disgrace! Disowned! He spat the word with contempt. It comes as no surprise, to tell you the truth, to hear that you're finally nobody. His slimy friends told you, Sirius retorted. I'm afraid you're going to have to stick your big, drippy, smelly nose somewhere else, Snivellus. My life is none of your concern. They cast you out, Severus went on. They couldn't stand the sight of you anymore. You know, Padfoot, James interjected, I think someone really wants their arse royally whipped tonight. Stupefy! Expelliarmus! Levicorpus circumsempra! The last spell finally found its target, hitting James right in the chest. James looked at the spot stunned,
with his mouth parted as though waiting for something terrible to happen to him. Nothing did. 1 moment. 2. The curse hadn't worked. James crooked his lips, tightly pressing on his chest with his fingers. "You fucked up, Snape," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What did you hit me with?"
"The fuck did you do, Snivellus?" Sirius added.
"You were right," he asked James. James nodded, his eyes on Severus. "Working on another hex, aren't you? What does it do, wipe your nose for you?"
"You better wipe your arse, too," Sirius said. "You don't want it all wet and stinky when Mulcible and Avery come to kiss it."
Who was he trying to impress, I wonder? His dear moldy fart? "You fear him," Severus said. "As you should." "What's it supposed to do, Snivellus? What did you throw at him?" Sirius asked, angry red sparks coming out from the tip of his wand. "Confess or I'll—" "I think I know what it is," James cut him. "I'll show you. Lift up your sleeves, Snape," he commanded coldly. "I do not take orders from you, Potter. Impedimenta! Ex novicorpus! Expelliarmus!" Severus's wand flew out of his grip, hitting the wall and falling to the floor. "Lift up your sleeves, Severus. I know all about this. No worries. Now, Lily's told me. Remember Lily, my girlfriend?" Sirius tilted his head curiously. "He cuts himself," James explained. "He's edgy like that. He does it with that hex. I thought it sounded familiar." With a silent spell, Severus's sleeves were pulled back. Severus wasn't expecting it. He seemed startled for a moment, but that was all it took. With a swift move, Sirius ducked to the floor and snatched Severus's wand, shoving it into his robes and proceeding to grab Severus and twist his arms behind his back. Severus thrashed against him, spitting swears and curses maniacally. James walked around Severus too, inspecting his arms. The mark wasn't there, not yet. "Told you," James said, pointing at the red cuts. "Let go, Black!" Severus roared, huffing angrily. "Ignore me if you dare! 1-on-1 like a proper wizard, like an equal! Like a real Black would do!" He panted. "But you're not my equal, Sev," Sirius said to Severus's ear, making him jerk away from the unwanted intimacy. "And you'll never be, not with that face and your filthy snot all over it." "Fuck you," Severus hissed. "Gross," James said, inspecting Severus's forearms. "Is that what you're trying to do to me, Sev? Cut me?" "Fight me," Severus said again. "Did you try to cut me, Sev?" James repeated as Sirius tightened his grip on Severus's wrists. Severus pressed his lips together, his chest heaving. "My family's like him," Sirius said. "Working on all sorts of spells and hexes to impress their Dark Lord. That's how they earn their way in." James jabbed Severus's ribs with his wand. "Is it right, Snape?" "What do you care?" Severus snapped. Sirius snorted. "But of course we care, Snivellus, so much, don't we, Prongs?" "Certainly. I'd hate for you to give Stinky more than bad impression, what with that greasy hair of yours. It doesn't really suit a royal such as yourself." Sirius smirked. "That's right, you don't want your first date with dear Boogerwort to result in a thank you next situation, do you?" "First dates are all about good impressions," James added. "Don't be a coward, Black. Return my wand. Fight me!" Severus hissed again, spittle flying from his mouth. "Sure," Sirius said dismissively. "You know what I think, Prongs? I think Sev needs a makeover. We should teach him how to wash his hair before he ends up embarrassing himself to someone so important. I'm referring to this serial killer you look up to, Snivellus. A wonderful person he is." "The hair is beyond saving," James said. "A haircut, maybe?" Severus bailed. He stopped struggling. Sirius tilted his head, smiling at James as though trying to hold back a burst of laughter. "That's an excellent idea!" More than wanting to look away, Harry wanted to scream, to enter the scene and stop it, to do something, anything that would change, undo this. But he couldn't, for it had already happened. All he could do was stand there helplessly and watch as his dad and his godfather pushed Severus to the floor and immobilized him. It was James who straddled Severus's chest, keeping him still by squeezing his thighs around him, as Sirius sat on Severus's arms and forced his head still. The spell was quick and wordless. James waved his wand 2-3 times, and Severus never stopped struggling, thrashing under them like a fish out of water. "Here you go, your majesty," Sirius sneered. "Definitely an improvement," James added. They finally unmounted Severus and stood tossing Severus's wand nearby and swiftly disappearing under the invisibility cloak, running away. Severus rolled over onto his front and then rose to his hands and knees, breathing hard. His hair was cut unevenly, long on one side and almost completely shaven off on the other. He felt his scalp with a trembling hand, his eyes stuck in terror on his own hair strands lying next to him on the carpet. "I'll kill you, Potter," he shouted beyond control. "I'll fucking kill you, Potter!" He stumbled up to his feet, swaying, raising his wand, his eyes wet, but the two boys were nowhere to be seen. The corridor dissolved and another memory appeared. "Sectum sempra," Severus said. They were in Spinner's End living room again. A deep cut appeared on Tobias's arm, then another across his chest. Tobias stepped back in terror, hands on his wounds. "Leave," said Severus. "Never come back, or I'll kill you. Sectum sempra!" He cast again, another slash ripping open Tobias's thigh. Harry blinked and found himself in Diagon Alley. Severus, who was now a young adult, was lazily browsing through the shelves of a bookstore when he noticed Lily doing the same an aisle away. On her hand she wore a large silver engagement ring. Severus walked up to her hesitantly. "Lily," he said. Her eyes shot up from the book she was holding. Her expression revealed no emotions whatsoever. "Hi," she said coldly, nodding at him stiffly before flipping through another book. "It's been a long time," Severus said. "Would you like it?" "No," she said. "Thanks, though. I gotta go. James is waiting for me. See you," she said in her most flat voice, walking away without sparing him a second glance. Then Severus was with Tom again, this time strolling through a flourished botanical garden.
"Don't waste your time on her," Tom said. "There are much better women for you to meet, worthy of you, who will understand and appreciate the things the mudblood couldn't."
Severus shook his head. "She's marrying Potter. Can you imagine? The most arrogant, stuck-up—"
"Let me introduce you to someone else, and we'll see if you'll still care about that girl. I expect better judgment from you, Severus. You surely don't think Evans is a fitting choice for you."
Severus remained silent for a long moment, then— "Introduce me to whom?"
"Beatrice May, Lucius's friend. Pure blood, strictly homeschooled. She's expressed an interest."
The memory faded, and Harry landed in a large aristocratic bedroom. Before the tall fire hearth, Severus and a plump, dark-haired woman were sitting on a sofa. The woman tried to kiss him, but Severus kept his lips pressed together and turned his head away. "Come on," she said. "Later." "You always say that." Severus didn't look at her. He locked his eyes with the dancing flames, his mind quite obviously miles away. The woman sneaked her hand on his lap, stroking his inner thigh lazily, but Severus removed it before it reached his crotch. The woman's eyes hardened. "I'm doing you a favor, you know," she said, and at that Severus finally looked up. "You think I'd choose to be with a half-blood? You never owl me, you never take me out. You still think about the little mudblood, don't you?" "Don't call her that," Severus snapped.
"I will call her whatever I want, Snape. Never forget that I'm here only because our Lord wants me to. Hell, I'll even marry you, if he asks me to. But don't you dare resist me like that when we both know I'm severely downgrading myself by being with you."
She tried to kiss him again, but Severus flinched away.
"You're so ugly, Snape,"
she whispered bitterly against his neck.
"So bloody ugly, awkward, narrow-minded, not to mention penniless."
She stood up, summoning a long, elegant cloak from the dresser.
"Sacrifices have their limits, really,"
she scoffed, leaving the room swiftly. The memories that came next were familiar to Harry. Severus begging Dumbledore to save Lily's life. Severus crying in despair at the realization that Lily had been murdered because of him. Then there were memories of Severus protecting Harry, first from Quirrell, then by pushing Karkaroff for information. From year to year, always there, always protecting him. And then Dumbledore was sitting on the headmaster's chair, and Severus was pacing before him. "He will be asking questions, Dumbledore. Questions I do not wish to answer. What have I ever done that's given you the impression that I enjoy the company of children?" "This little cooperation of yours could turn out for the best. Do try and see him for who he really is, my boy. You might be surprised." Severus nodded, accepting his fate. "I'm not doing this for you, Dumbledore." "Stag Merlin, you're not my boy." A second later, Dumbledore and Severus were walking towards the lake. The sun was so bright, Harry could feel the warmth hit his face. "He's arrogant, insufferable, weak. What about his strengths?" The dark line between Severus's brows deepened. "He doesn't have any."
I want him out of my house as soon as possible. Perhaps if we postpone this for a little while.
Impossible, Severus. Be patient.
Severus sighed, and the next moment Harry was watching himself dragging Severus up the stairs to his bedroom.
I'm taking you back to your room. Can you walk?
I'm not crippled.
Be cooperative now.
Son of! Severus fell on top of him on the bed, immobilizing him with his weight. Harry looked up at him unsuredly and then pushed him off. Severus rolled on his back. Suffocating, Severus complained, tugging at his collar. Harry unbuttoned the first buttons of his shirt awkwardly until Severus could breathe again.
Snape?
Yes.
Should I elbow Dumbledore?
Then Harry was leaning over him to adjust his pillows. Severus pulled Harry closer and they kissed. There were details missing from the memory, and it was all foggy at the edges. It must have been the drunkenness that had wiped most of it away, Harry thought. The kiss, however, was intact. The next memory dragged Harry to Dumbledore's office once again.
Don't you get it, Severus? He's young, confused, intrigued, perhaps.
Severus seemed ready to explode. I hate to break it to you, Headmaster, but Harry Potter isn't the first teenager to break through to this world, nor the first one to be intrigued or confused. I fail to see how these undeniably daunting struggles of his have to be my concern.
They don't,
Dumbledore agreed.
but this is why it is time for you to distance yourself from Harry now. It would be preferable if you kept your interactions outside the classroom to a minimum, don't you think? As you can barely stand the boy, I can't imagine you'll agree.
Severus looked at Dumbledore intently.
And what if I don't? Dumbledore smiled.
Do you want to fight me, Severus?
The office disappeared. Severus was in his Hogwarts chambers, staring at the dancing flames of the hearth as the sound of knuckles against wood could be heard in the background.
Snape!
A voice called, and Harry realized it was his own.
I know you're in there, stop pretending.
Severus's lips whitened as he clenched his jaw. He squeezed at the glass hard, but didn't move.
Professor? Professor!
Then Severus stood abruptly, hurried to the door, and did nothing. His fingers hovered over the doorknob motionlessly. At the sound of steps fading away, Severus released a long breath of relief and closed his eyes. The memories whirled around again. Harry saw his past self covering himself with a heavy duvet in Severus's chambers. Rolling on his side, he looked at Severus, who appeared to be sleeping.
I may be insomniac, but I love sleep,
Harry whispered.
My life has the tendency to fall apart when I'm awake, you know.
Harry watched himself shut his eyes close and fall asleep. In the cold darkness of the room, Severus's own eyes emitted a strange light as they opened. In reality, he hadn't been asleep at all.
Your life's falling apart anyway, and is taking mine down with it,
he whispered to Harry, smiling softly, his hand reaching to caress Harry's messy hair. But Harry was already asleep. Another change. And now Harry and Severus were sitting together on Severus's couch, much closer to each other than Harry remembered. A few months had passed since the last memory.
I was actually thinking that this can't be replaced,
Harry said.
This.
I don't care to date someone. This is enough.
But Severus looked away in panic, and the memory shifted again.
I don't think I can keep it a secret for much longer,
Harry was saying this time.
It's suffocating me. When I'm out there, I feel like I can't even breathe sometimes.
Severus studied him, and now Harry saw something he hadn't noticed before. Severus smiling to himself as he listened.
You're here now, he said.
The room disappeared, and it was suddenly twilight. Severus was leaning against the ledge of the clock tower's balcony as Dumbledore fed a grey owl from the palm of his hand.
Is Harry still persuading you to open your chambers for him at night?
He's not persuading me, Severus retorted. What are you doing with him all these evenings you spend together in your office?
I was about to ask you the same question, Severus.
You trust him. You do not trust me.
And yet he trusts you,
Dumbledore said.
Do not think I underestimate what you have done so far, Severus. To risk your life by facing Voldemort, giving him information that has to seem valuable and yet be untrue. This is a task I could only entrust you with.
And yet you cannot entrust me with whatever it is that you share with him.
Has he tried to approach you in an inappropriate manner again?
No.
He wants to.
I know.
Do you want him to?
In the darkness of the night, Severus's eyes glistened in disbelief.
"No," he said in an offended tone.
He's almost 17 now. Isn't that tempting to you? That his wishes will soon be permissible?
The silence that followed made Harry hold his breath. His wishes will never be permissible, Severus said dismissively. Then memory changed and Dumbledore was talking again, his voice grave.
Should anything happen to me, you need to be the one to tell him that on the night Lord Voldemort tried to kill him, when Lily cast her own life between them as a shield, the killing curse rebounded upon Lord Voldemort, and a fragment of Voldemort's soul was blasted apart from the hole and latched itself onto the only living soul left in that collapsed building. Part of Lord Voldemort lives inside Harry, and it is that which gives him the power of speech with snakes, and connection with Lord Voldemort's mind that he has never understood. And while that fragment of soul unmissed by Voldemort remains attached to and protected by Harry, Lord Voldemort cannot die.
So the boy must die? Asked Severus.
And Voldemort himself must do it, Severus. That is essential.
I thought all these years that we were protecting him for her, for Lily.
We have protected him because it has been essential to teach him, to raise him, to let him try his strength,
said Dumbledore, his eyes still tightly shut.
Meanwhile, the connection between them grows ever stronger, a parasitic growth. Sometimes I have thought he suspects it himself. If I know him, he will have arranged matters so that when he does set out to meet his death, it will truly mean the end of Voldemort.
You have kept him alive, so that he could die at the right moment. Harry had never seen such contempt in Severus's face before. You have used me. I have spied for you and lied for you, put myself in mortal danger for you. Everything was supposed to keep him safe. Now you tell me you have been raising him like a pig for slaughter.
But this is touching, Severus. Have you grown to care for the boy after all?
For him, Severus spat. Expecto Patronum! From the tip of his wand burst the silver doe. She jumped on the desk and then soared out of the window. Dumbledore watched it carefully, and when he turned to Severus, there were tears in his eyes.
After all this time?
Always, said Severus. The office was lost in a haze, and Harry stood by the black lake, which was illuminated by the countless stars of the dark sky. He saw himself wrestling with Severus in the water, trying to escape his tight grip around his waist. They kissed, hastily, angrily, passionately. The moment dissolved to mists and reformed into the kitchen of Grimmauld Place. The members of the Order were sitting around the long wooden table, and there was an argument going on. Severus was leaning over the table, looking down at Remus, who had now stood up too. I will not accept this, shouted Remus. Dumbledore must have lost his mind to think that you are even remotely fit to do my job, Lupin. Come on, be my guest, do it better than me. Though I think Dumbledore might think twice this time before letting a wolf... Oh, come on, Severus! We all know what happened last time, Severus hissed. What does he think you can do to protect Harry that none of us can? Why now? Questioning Dumbledore. Why can't he stay here? This is a safe house, for God's sake, and you... Questioning Dumbledore will lead you nowhere, Severus said in disdain. The decision has been made. A different safe house was specifically constructed for this purpose. I will be visiting. My bloody point exactly. You will be visiting. You're the last person on earth Harry needs right now, Severus. No offense, he sneered. None taken, Severus yelled. I want this much less than you think I do. Oh, no, you're not the victim here as much as you love to... What am I supposed to do? Just shut my mouth and let you abuse him like you always do, this time in private? Miss Weasley rose from her seat.
I think that's enough, Remus.
She pointed her eyes at the chair, and Remus slowly lowered himself into it. Severus didn't seem willing to follow. Perhaps you should beat some common sense into your jealousy, Lupin. Only a madman would trust a boy with an animal. Remus's frustrated expression turned blank at once. Harry could almost feel how much that comment hurt.
Severus, enough,
Miss Weasley said. Moody tapped his wand against the table impatiently. Severus at last dropped to his chair. I am not here to be questioned. If you don't approve of Dumbledore's decisions, then by all means walk out, Molly. And you too. He glared at Remus.
Severus is right, Moody said, and Remus looked at him in surprise. He doesn't care for Harry's soft spots. That's what makes him good for the job. All of you are dangerously attached to him. Severus isn't. It can work.
What soft spots? Is caring for him something to be ashamed of now? Remus asked. Should I pretend I'm not worried? Quite literally, Harry is all I have.
Then you should have taken better care of your dog, spat Severus. Before Harry knew it, all of them had jumped off their chairs at once. Remus was pointing his wand at Severus, who was pointing at him his own. The rest of them aimed at the duo, ready to block any possible curses.
Cut out, Snape, Remus said dangerously. You don't deserve to be in this house.
And you think you do, Severus retorted, but he lowered his wand and departed.
The scene changed. Severus was in Regulus's old room, and someone was climbing up the stairs. The room had been transformed into what seemed to be a small potions lab. Harry recognized the ingredients for polyjuice potions scattered on the counter as Severus worked. Remus walked in and leaned against the wall, observing Severus silently.
I shouldn't have disputed you in front of the Order. I'm sorry.
Perhaps you missed the hint, Lupin, but the reason I'm not still downstairs is that I wanted privacy.
Remus nodded.
I need to know that you'll at least try to be nice to him. It isn't your loyalty I don't trust, it's your temper.
He's not a child. He'll manage.
I don't think he's a child.
No, you think he's his father. Remus smiled.
You think that too,
he said. Severus didn't answer.
You used to despise him gravely, Remus continued. What changed?
What makes you think something's changed?
Dumbledore would have never chosen you for this otherwise.
Severus remained silent, filling a line of bottles with something dense.
Harry is not what you think he is, Severus interrupted. Remus sighed.
Severus, look, whatever animosity you may have had toward James, and I really don't blame you for it, you don't have to drag Harry into it. That's all I'm trying to say. And I'd like to visit, let's say once a week. Dumbledore might allow it if you guide me to a bogey I won't know where the house is. There's no need to know. I only want to be there for him. I am the closest relative he has.
Relative? How?
He doesn't have anyone else. Please. He needs someone whom he can trust.
And why should he trust you, I wonder?
Your company bears the weight of a very ambiguous past after all, Lupin.
You almost killed me. Severus ignored Lupin's attempts to interrupt him.
You almost killed me because your little gangs thought it'd be fun.
What was it exactly? Yes, a joke.
You're trying to isolate him, just like you tried to isolate Lily.
At that, Severus stopped. He placed his cauldron on the counter, wiped his hands with a towel carefully, and turned to look at Remus. I beg your pardon.
Haven't you learned yet, Severus, that you can't keep the people you care for to yourself? Haven't you learned that you can't control everything?
Severus stared hard at him expressionlessly, and the scene changed again. It was the last day of the school year. The students were all outside, dragging their trunks to the carriages. Dumbledore was supervising the students, along with Severus, who didn't seem to enjoy himself at all.
All these children, unique in so many ways. Every year they get better and better, I think.
You think, Severus agreed.
Harry is skeptical about the safe house.
I'm not surprised.
His magic is getting stronger.
Yes, I've been watching his magic, Severus said. It's become different. I've been observing it for a while now.
My child,
Dumbledore said in surprise, a hint of amusement in his voice.
I'd swear I've heard you say these exact words before, but the last time you were observing someone's magic, it was before you even arrived at Hogwarts as a student, yes?
At Severus's shocked expression, Dumbledore shook a hand dismissively.
Doesn't matter, it was a long time ago.
The yard swirled, and Harry was back in the headmaster's office. Severus was kneeling before Dumbledore, examining his darkened hand.
I warned you. Why put it on when you knew it carried a curse? Did I not warn you?
You told me to wait. I waited too long.
Why even want to put it on?
The ring blade cracked on the wooden surface of the desk. Severus was casting spells furiously.
The curse is extraordinarily strong. I have trapped it in one hand for the time being.
You have done very well, Severus. How long do you think I have?
Severus shook his head. I cannot tell. Maybe a year. There is no halting such a spell forever. It will spread eventually. It is the sort of curse that strengthens over time.
I am fortunate, extremely fortunate, that I have you, Severus.
If you had only summoned me a little earlier, I might have been able to do more, buy you more time, said Severus. If you had waited for me to examine the curse first, break it before you put it on. Did you think that breaking the ring would break the curse?
Something like that. I was delirious, no doubt. Well, really, this makes matters much more straightforward. I refer to the plan Lord Voldemort is revolving around me. His plan to have the Morphoid boy murder me.
Dumbledore straightened himself in his chair. The Dark Lord does not expect Draco to succeed anymore, Severus said. This is merely punishment for Lucius's recent failures. Slow torture for Draco's parents while they watch him fail and pay the price. He was given an entire school year and failed miserably. By the start of the new term, the Dark Lord won't be so patient.
In short, the boy has had a death sentence pronounced upon him as surely as I have,
Dumbledore added.
Now we know that the natural successor to the job since Draco failed is yourself.
There was a short pause. That is the Dark Lord's plan.
Lord Voldemort foresees a moment in the near future when he will not need a spy at Hogwarts.
He believes the school will soon be in his grasp, yes.
And if it does fall into his grasp, I have your word that you will do all in your power to protect the students of Hogwarts.
Severus nodded.
Good. Now then, you must promise me that you will not risk your cover by contacting Harry again after I'm gone until, of course, it's necessary.
Severus's discomfort was obvious. Are you intending to let him kill you?
Certainly not. You must kill me.
There was a short pause in which Harry expected Severus to burst into laughter, the familiar one he reserved for moments he absolutely despised but could not ever avoid. Would you like me to do it now? Or would you like a few moments to compose an epitaph?
Oh, not quite yet,
said Dumbledore casually.
I believe I want to see a last opening feast first.
If you don't mind dying, why not let Draco do it?
That boy's soul is not yet so damaged,
Dumbledore explained.
I would not have it ripped apart on my account.
And my soul, Dumbledore! Mine? The scene changed again, and now Severus was marching on a long white corridor while a Mediwitch followed him with quick steps. She opened a door for him, and Harry managed to follow inside just in time before the Mediwitch locked it behind them. Harry recognized the place immediately. St. Mungo's. At the corner of the small room, there was a single bed with white covers and blue pillows. On the bed was sitting a woman who didn't seem to notice that Severus was there at all. Severus dragged a chair closer and sat across from her. Hey, he said softly, and Harry was startled at how kind and soft his voice was. Mum? Mum? Harry took a better look, but the woman looked completely different from the previous memories. It seemed as though she had aged 100 years in a single decade. Her face was tired, pale, her hair entirely white. She seemed to awake from a deep sleep at her son's words, although her eyes were open all along. She turned her head to him slowly, as though noticing him for the first time. Severus? Severus smiled, and it was the saddest smile Harry had ever seen. The woman's hair was long and tangled. Severus pushed her wild fringe aside and tucked it behind her ear before bending forward to kiss her forehead. How are you? The minutes passed and no answer came. The silence didn't seem to surprise Severus or annoy him. He looked at her with a kind of patience he'd never demonstrated before. How are you? He repeated at last, and this time his mother smiled. I'm good, she said loudly, consumed by sudden positivity. She nodded to herself at the words. Albus sends his regards. He expected me to visit you some time ago, but I've been busy. I expected you to visit some time ago, she said calmly. It's safer here. You surely know. You get the newspapers, do you not? You see, said Severus, the darkness is spreading. He's getting stronger day by day. He has an army now bigger than before. You wouldn't imagine. Bigger than ever. He's getting stronger, she repeated dully. He doesn't like your magic, Sev. I've told you that. At that, Severus laughed, a burst of laughter so genuine and deep that made Harry jump back. Never mind. It's your fault, Sev. You're making him fear you. All he wanted was some peace of mind, and you attacked him like a vicious monster. I'm sorry, Severus said. His voice came out pained and gravelly.
The woman looked at him nervously, as though she didn't know whether she should believe him or not. "Things have changed," he added at last, looking at his own spread fingers. "Do you recall how you'd always call me exceptionally foolish? All my life I tried to prove you wrong, but it seems you were right." At the dim light coming from the tiny window above them, Harry could see the similarities on their faces clearly. "He asks of things I cannot do. He wants me to be in charge if Draco fails him. Draco's a child." Severus clutched at the fabric of his cloak in a tight grip, as if it provided him with the greatest safety in the world. "And Dumbledore is simply sitting there enjoying the suspense." Harry wondered whether there was a ritual here, Severus sharing everything from the depths of his soul, spilling his most private secrets, perhaps knowing that no one would believe her, even if she tried to tell. What did Tobias do to her to make her lose her mind like this? Why had Severus told Harry that his mum was dead? Perhaps because being dead was better than being like this. And then there's Harry. At the mention of his name, Harry stepped closer. He stood in anticipation, noticing how Severus was frowning intensely. Is it selfish of me that I don't want him to hate me? For the rest of them I hardly care, but Snapes aren't capable of feeling love, you used to say." At that, she nodded confidently. "Would you mind if I was gay?" The question was blurted out unexpectedly so fast it sounded like one long word.
Snapes hate women anyway, Sev. All of them.
The scene changed.
"Spying on me! And now you expect me to accept to be interrogated as well?"
It was a simple question, Severus.
"Well, then you know the answer very well."
It was midnight. Severus was standing in front of the fire hearth in Spinner's End, his fingers clutched around a handful of flue powder.
"You were going to Harry. Why?"
asked Dumbledore.
"And here I thought you'd never look about in my own house. You ask why?" retorted Severus. "It is my duty to look after him. You made it my duty. You told me to visit him every day."
"Not every night, however."
"When you took me back," Severus looked at him hatefully, "I thought I'd have a chance to forgive myself, you know. I only ended up blaming myself more."
"You were young. There was no need to blame anyone."
"No, there isn't. And I'll do the job. I'll obey. But don't tell me how often to visit him. And don't ask me if I care about him, because clearly I don't have the privilege to."
Through Severus's fingers, the flue powder slipped and piled on the carpet.
"Harry's fate is not on you, Severus. Neither was Lily's."
With his back turned, Severus shook his head. He grabbed another handful of powder and threw it into the hearth.
"If you need me, you know where to find me,"
Severus said, and stepped into the flames. In the next scene, it was morning. Harry saw himself sleeping on his back, his limbs entangled with the sheets in the most impossible way. Severus was trying to disentangle himself from Harry without waking him up. After failing to do so, he dropped his head back on the pillow and rubbed his eyes. The sleeping Harry was lying on top of Severus's arm, Harry noticed. Severus's fingers twitched repeatedly, most likely in an attempt to not go numb. Harry couldn't help but smile sadly at what he was seeing. Severus rolled on his side, his face inches from Harry's.
"Potter, wake up."
He pushed gently at Harry's shoulder. "Potter." He pushed Harry's hair to the side to reveal his face. His fingers followed the red marks the pillow had left on Harry's cheek until he reached his lips. He brushed them slightly with his thumb, looking at Harry as if he was about to kiss him. Harry's eyes snapped open, and Severus removed his hand quickly. Severus was now kneeling before Dumbledore, kissing his hand as tears ran down his face.
"There must be a way. Please! If anyone can do something, it's you. You could save him. There must be a way. Please."
Severus was a mess. He sobbed and whimpered in despair.
"I know it's sad, Severus, but there is no other way. Voldemort cannot be killed as long as Harry lives."
"I don't care about Voldemort. Save him! I know you can! Save him. Please. You never cared. You never hesitated to risk other people's lives so you could reach your goals. The boy's safety didn't never concern you. You only wanted him to live for as long as you needed him to."
"Do you really believe that, Severus? You believe that if there was a way for him to live, I wouldn't have chosen it? You don't see all the things I do for Harry."
"Please," Severus begged. "Better
It's better to kill me. We can tell Voldemort to kill me instead of him. I'll take his place. This is my fault. I should pay. Not him. I should pay for this. Kill me. Kill me.
Dumbledore opened a cabinet and shoved the calming draught into Severus's hands.
Don't let him die. Don't. He can't. Not again, please. I can't do this. It's not fair. Please. It is the only way. Calm down, please. You'll understand when you do. I know how much you loved Lily, but you don't get to talk about Lily. You killed her too. Everyone I have ever loved. This has nothing to do with Lily. Thought it did. Not about her. Calm down, Severus. I'll lose him. I can't. I love him more than my own life. Please.
Harry was pulled into mists again. He was back at Grimald's place, and Remus was sitting across Severus at the kitchen table. Remus was clutching his head in his hands, his elbows on the table. Outside the window, the moon was almost full.
Drink it all, Severus said, emptying his own goblet.
Remus laughed bitterly. You're drinking wine in front of me when I have to drink this.
Severus took another sip quietly.
Remus gulped the wolfsbane and shrugged.
Damn my fate, Severus,
Remus muttered. Damn fate, Severus agreed quickly. His cheeks were flushed, as if he'd been drinking for some time. And damn Potters and their blasted curiosity to dig into things. Severus pressed, but it was obvious that Remus was in so much pain he could barely hear him. Dig into secrets, dig into lives.
The moon was now almost entirely revealed, and Remus squeezed his eyes shut.
Leave Harry out of it, he mumbled.
Damn Harry Potter for growing up, Severus insisted, his voice louder. And damn him for ever being a child, he added. Remus grunted, dropping his forehead on the table. Despite his pain, he chuckled.
You're obsessed, Severus.
Severus raised his glass, and the scene changed.
Your temperature is under control for now, Severus told Dumbledore. But you might feel weaker as the days go by. If you experience dizziness, summon me immediately.
Of course, Dumbledore said. Has your Draco had any new ideas lately, perhaps?
He is not. The Dark Lord has refused to save his father's skin and or show any mercy until he has Hogwarts under his grasp. On the other hand, I have thought of something.
To break the walls?
To get you out of them. Hogsmeade.
Brilliant idea, Severus. A Hogsmeade weekend, of course, yes.
Then Harry and Severus made love. Severus thrust into him fast, kissing him deeply, slappily, and Harry thought that might have been the only time Severus had sex and wanted it. But a moment later,
Avada Kedavra,
said Severus. Green light shot from his wand and hit Dumbledore, taking his life.
Come, come, someone yelled. To the castle!
The dark mark spread on the sky, shadowing everything, and Severus looked at Harry, who screamed and screamed and screamed. Severus was alone back in the safe house, and none of Harry's belongings were there. The mattress was pulled slightly aside, and Severus was sitting on it, reading a torn piece of a letter Harry wrote to Hermione but never sent. It only carried a few words. It scares me how little I know about him. Most of the time I get the impression that I don't know him at all. But then again he kisses back, even for a second. Severus wiped his tears and tucked the paper inside his robes. Then Harry blinked and he was back to the castle. Dumbledore's portrait was talking.
Now, Severus, the sword. Do not forget that it must be taken on the conditions of need and valor, and he must not know that you give it. If Voldemort should read Harry's mind and see you acting for him.
I know.
Pulling aside the portrait, Severus revealed the Gryffindor sword.
And you still aren't going to tell me why it's so important to give part of the sword?
No, I don't think so,
said Dumbledore.
You will know what to do with it. And be careful, Severus.
Don't worry, Dumbledore. I have a plan.
Then Severus was hiding behind a tree in a dark forest.
A huge scarf tightly wrapped around his neck. His cloak billowed back and forth in the cold wind.
Harry was there too, merely a yard away. Severus watched as Harry undressed and jumped into the lake.
The doe bounced on the snow and returned to Severus, rubbing her forehead on his thigh. Severus seemed to be muttering something as though he was counting. The wind blew his hair, and he closed his eyes against it as he pulled a deluminator out of his pocket. He clicked it, but no light came out. Instead, there was a loud cracking sound, and then Ron popped out of nowhere, looking around him confusedly.
He couldn't see Severus, but the doe ran to the lake, and Ron followed it. Severus remained behind the tree, watching. The moment sank into darkness, and Harry was back in the headmaster's office once more.
Is it done?
Severus's traveling cloak was wet from the melting snow, and his boots were covered in mud. Yes, the boy has the sword. Now leave. He turned to the other portraits. All of you.
Why?
Dumbledore asked. I think I saw something. I want to check something. The portraits emptied at once. Oh, but Dumbledore's. Severus locked the door and took out his wand. He looked at it curiously, and then cast a spell. Expecto Patronum. The silver doe appeared again, gracious and elegant. Severus paced around it, observing it with wide eyes. On the top of her head, two barely visible horns had sprung up. Impossible.
Severus, what is it?
Dumbledore asked. Severus kneeled down, petting the stag's head, his fingers slipping through it.
Severus?
I slept with a boy, Severus said abruptly. The night before I took your life.
I am aware,
said Dumbledore quietly. Severus blinked, and a single tear ran down his face. His fingers clutched on the stag's substance, and the animal bumped its head on his chest lovingly.
I love him,
Severus continued, as if only now realizing how much he meant it.
I love him.
Harry rose out of the pensieve, and seconds later he was kneeling on the carpeted floor, on the same spot the stag was standing only a moment ago. He almost expected Severus to pull him up and kiss him.